Hey, it's the French student here, and today we're going to be talking about the singleton pattern regarding to Java. So, a pattern, when it comes to programming, is some kind of a way of programming that's used so often that it's called a pattern, and then it can be recognized in different kind of code, and then we all agreed at some point to actually just use it the same way. So, a singleton is an object that is static, but normally with all static objects, they can be accessed everywhere. But this is a static object that can only be accessed through an object of this static object. Even though you would normally not create an object of a static object, you just call them on the class base. Might seem a bit confusing, but let's just create an example and then it might get easy to understand. So, first of all, we have our class single object. And first of all, just go through a basic example of a singleton, and then we have three different ways of creating a singleton, which works more or less in the same way, but it's a bit different. So a basic singleton contains, first of all, of a private object inside itself. So we would create a private static singleton object, which equals to a new, and we would call this instance. So private static singleton object named instance, which is the name, equals new singleton object. So we would also like to have a empty constructor. It doesn't need to be empty, but in this case we just make it empty. So basic single object. And it's just an empty constructor. So we are creating an empty version of itself. And then how we're going to access it, because our object, that's like the point of having a singleton is only being able to have one object and only one object of this specific class. So we have the singleton object. This could contain a lot of different stuff, but right now we're just creating a singleton. So we have the private object, the private constructor, then we have a public static method returning the singleton object itself called getInstance. And what it does is just simply return the instance. So what does this allow us to have some kind of feature, or normally in like an example, I've been using it just like in a simple game where you have some kind of like time object, where the time is, you only have one time, but it also consists in multiple stages. So you need to be able to get this time, different areas, but it's the same time we're accessing. Or maybe regarding to some kind of like point score in a game or so on. But we would just create like a public void. Let's just get a message. It just simply prints something very simply like a hello world. So let's use it. So in our main class, if we wanted to create a single object, we would normally use single object equals new single object. But this isn't possible because our constructor is private. So we can only access the constructor inside the class itself. So instead of doing new singleton object, we would access our already pre-created object inside the class through our getInstance method, which get the instance, which is the already pre-created object. So we would just call the get or single object. It's static method we call on the class single object.getInstance, which now allow us to just on this single object, for example, call the get message and get the message. So the point of this is only being able to have one of these, because we can't create a new object. So if we created another single object, which is called single object 1, which is equal to single object get single object. If we, for example, inside this one had some kind of, let's have a private int number, which is equal to 0, And then whenever we call getMessage, we add. Let's do the other way around. So first we would do a number plus plus, add 1 to the number, and then we would print number and then the number. So if we first call a getMessage on our single object and then call it on our single object 1 that getMessage, you will be able to see that even though we're calling this method on 2 different objects, it actually is the same object because they're both referring to this one. And this one contains the number because it's been created here in itself. It might seem a bit confusing, but it actually can be quite useful. So that's the basics of this just a singleton of the basic concepts. Then I'm going to be talking about 3 different ways of creating singleton objects, and they're a bit different, and there will be a timestamps description if you want to only hear about one of them. So first of all, we have the LazyInitializedSingleton, the StaticBlockSingleton, and the EagerInitializedSingleton. First of all, I'll be talking about the EagerInitializedSingleton, which actually is the same as the one we just created as our example, which is where we have just a private. In some cases you would make it final, but we didn't before, but you have a private static EagerInitializedSingleton called instance. And then you just have a private constructor and you get the instance through simply just a getInstance method. Then we have the StaticBlockSingleton, which is kind of similar as well, but the difference is the EagerSingleton installation, this one is created when the program starts, create this variable. When the program starts, create this variable, but then use a static block where we have a try catch block when creating the instance. So if you want to make sure nothing goes wrong when creating the instance, or if it's regarding some kind of like loading or some files or something, then it could be nice to actually check to make sure it works completely fine. Otherwise, we would like to cast an exception. So that's the basics of the 2. Then we have the LazyInitializedSingleton, which is a bit different in the way that where our eager and our StaticBlockSingleton are created when the program starts. This one is first created when you call the getInstance method for the first time. So because we create, like previously, we just create a private static object of name instance. We have a private constructor, but then our object is first created by our getInstance if our instance equal to null. So first time the instance is called, the instance is null, and then we create instance equal new LazyInitializedSingleton, and then for the next time again where we call something on a getInstance, we're able to just get the instance itself. So here we would first create it and then call it where the other 2 are created at the beginning of the program. So that is pretty much the basics of our singleton pattern, with 3 ways of creating the simple singleton pattern depending on what you want to do. Just eager, just create it right away, no checks. Static, create it right away, but have a try catch block, check if it actually works, or cast an exception. And then a lazy one where we actually first create it when we need it. And depending on the situations, you might need a different way of constructing your singleton object. So that's all I had for now. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe, and have a wonderful day.